Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. Today's video is going to be about not doing damage per round and instead doing something more sinister. Doing debuff, controlling your opponents, and seeing what that actually entails, with a specific focus on the actual fear condition. This is a little bit in contrast to those optimized builds where you build up your damage per round and try to get the most out of the actual number of damages you can get. This is how to work in contrast with that, how to work differently from that, and how to greatly support players that do work like that are in your party. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is conditions. What do they do? Well, overall, they kind of give and take away advantage and disadvantage. They give you these great opportunities to make yourselves guarantee a hit almost, or about as close as you can get to doing so, or to make it harder for you to hit, or harder for them to hit you. Some of these spells that you get at level 1 can inflict these conditions. They can be encounter breaking conditions. You cast the restraint spell at the right time, enough people fail it, it is a feeding frenzy. There is nothing the DM can do to stop your team from devouring your opponents in those scenarios. So, depending on the condition you get, or the condition that's as a result of whatever skill or spell that you're using, will definitely affect the tides of battle. A lot of the times optimized players tend to stay away from this, so this is not really for you. If you happen to be a more role-playing kind of a character, this is going to be something that you can select spells or select skills that are going to be in theme for what you're doing, which is why we love them here. So one of the main focus we're going to be talking about in this video is the fear condition. And what this condition does is it grants the person afflicted by it disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. Now, some skills and things will greatly be influenced by that, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, as long as for fear really to work, you have to be in sight of whatever it is that you've caused this fear on. So that prevents this opponent who's afflicted by fear from advancing towards the person who induced that fear. This is a great tactic. This is awesome for helping to protect your other teammates, making sure the squishies don't get hurt. So what's really important about conditions is that they can be varied. They can be AoE conditions, they can be enforced in those kinds of scenarios, or they can be single targeted. Sometimes when you upcast spells like blindness or deafness, you can cast it on multiple targets after that. These are great to use, and we will talk about the difficulties of using these on higher end encounters or boss fights and what that actually means for you. So what we're going to get into right now is the specifics on the fear condition and why they work out so well. Now, again, what I mentioned before was the actual ailments of fear, and what that entails can be greatly used to change the scenario. A lot of the fear spells all have different riders attached to them, so they're not really exactly the same. The spell Cause Fear is probably the purest form of just a fear spell, where you just inflict one character with fear. Awesome on its own because of the other things it entails. Now, when you have disadvantage on ability checks, some of the things that you can do in combat that aren't necessarily damage actions can be greatly used with this. So, what I mean by this is, say you're fighting a knight-like character, someone with high AC, big two-handed weapon, and HP for miles, right? You manage to get the fear on them. Now, if your party happens to understand what you do and how these things kind of work, your stronger character with a high strength ability score can now go over and attempt to disarm the knight or the opponent that you're fighting. Because he has disadvantage and it's a strength check to disarm your opponent, you're rolling strength for strength, and you have like a barbarian that's going to go take that weapon from him. You manage to do that. What is this like? What does this opponent have left? Outside of cowering in fear because of what you did, he is now disarmed and has to fight the rest of the battle basically punching people in the face. Game changing, totally changes the dynamic. Abusive, probably. Eventually your DM will probably figure out something to prevent that, or as you get into higher levels it'll be harder and harder to do that. But we'll get into some of that and how that works. Another thing that works is, say you have a paladin or a hexblade. You have these characters that have the availability to use the Wrathful Smite spell. Now, what's great about this is if they fail the initial saving throw, the wisdom check to break the fear has to be an action. Now, they have to not take the attack action. They can't cast a spell. They can't do anything like that if they're going to try and break the fear spell. Now, because it's a wisdom check, they also have disadvantage on that check. So now it's even harder for them to do this because of the disadvantage they've imposed. They're constantly dealing with disadvantage on their attack rolls, and they have to now weigh the choice of whether or not they're actually going to take an attack or they're going to try and break the fear. Great, incredible circumstance to be in, because what do you do as say that's the big bad and you manage to break through legendary resistance and he failed that save, and now here we go. What does he do? He wastes that attack action to try and break the fear. To try and break the fear. Or maybe he has a pocket character somewhere that can cast the spell magic. But even so, that's a whole round where the damage dealing opponent couldn't do anything offensive. That's a big bonus that tips the scales of actions per round that affect your party in your favor. You want to do things like that, and fear greatly increases those chances. My other actual favorite fear spell is the actual fear spell. Now, this is a cone. It's a good size radius. You can hit a few people. You got to position yourself a little strategically for it. But what it does is incredible. It causes the opponents who fail that saving throw to drop whatever they're holding and then run away from you, taking the dash action. They can only do this while you're in their line of sight, and they cannot make a saving throw to break the fear until after they're outside of their line of sight of you. Here's the great part of that. Yeah, they're running away as fast as they possibly can, which is cool. If you're an evil character, you want your opponents to feel scared of you. It's a great tactic to use, and it causes your DM to have to think a little outside of the box. But they drop what they're holding. Casters drop their arcane focuses. Warriors fight with martial weapons, and they drop whatever it is they're holding. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure a wizard isn't literally holding their spellbook as they're casting spells, but a wizard without an arcane focus is a totally different kind of a wizard. These kinds of things matter. They can be used to great succession. That's what these conditions can do for you. Other conditions do other things. Paralyzed, if you stun an opponent, game over. You know, like you can petrify them. The only real downside of the conditions is the poison condition, because I'm heartbroken about it, because I would love to just poison everything in sight, but there's too many difficulties involved. But a lot of these conditions, they're great because they sway how the things in combat work. So now we're going to talk about how these conditions affect your more optimized players. There's always going to be the min-maxers, and you need them, and this is what works perfectly. So the min-maxers, you know who you are. Everyone wants to be a little bit just like you. Everyone wants to get the most out of their damage per their attack. They want to kill everything in one hit. Who doesn't want to feel like a god amongst men? Thank you for being in the party. We always need a bunch of you, and I know you guys do your homework. There's a lot of people who have channels that just strictly dedicated to doing that. It's incredible the math you guys need to do just to do that. Here's how we help you. These conditions are perfect because your party is always going to consist at least one or two of those people that are min-maxers, that are purely focused on dealing the most damage possible. Setting these people up to have advantage, to be able to last longer in combat, is really going to bring about a greater victory chance. You got to be a little bit kind of a backseat person with combat, specifically with combat, because of these conditions, because it's very rare you'll be dealing high numbers. You know, like you got to pick your spells. Your concentrations are going to be used on these effects, so you can't really use those damage over time spells that like control a whole area. This is what you do. You debilitate. You use debuffs to do those things. Causing that to happen causes your min-maxers to have a couple of things. reducing the amount of times that they get hit, because you know what, the DM has to strategize a little bit to make combat interesting. When you have these high damage people, taking them out is one of those things that they're going to want to focus on, because it helps to reduce what they have to do. Because if you're a paladin and you got to run away from combat because your HP is too low and no one can heal you, yeah, that's going to be good for the DM, and that's going to change the way the game is. So you got to accept that if you're dealing high numbers, you're going to get noticed, you know? This helps to keep them alive. This helps to keep them going, and if you can give them advantage, it helps them to kill characters faster. In the early levels, you'll kill everything in basically 1 or 2 hits, no matter who or what you are. You can throw a dagger all day, and basically everything is going to be fine if you're smart enough to stay out of melee. But as you get a little bit stronger, you got a little bit of a cushion, you can take a hit or two. That's when combat like this greatly is affected by conditions. You can use them to change a lot of things. They're thematically, which is why we love them. So whenever I make casters, it's a hard fight for me not to grab all the fear spells and use them. But when you're playing with min-maxers in your party, you can help them. If you have a conquest paladin in your party, fear is the gift that keeps on giving, because it's a conquest paladin. Your spell slots are restricted. You want to use smites as often as possible, but you want to get that effect of fear. You want to make sure that the people close to you, to the paladin, cannot move and take residual damage when they get up to levels that their auras do that. Important, great, incredible. You will see how well you will work together by inflicting those circumstances, and how, it can be a little overpowering for, you know, the DM to have to deal with when, say, your paladin has a reach weapon and his aura causes people to reduce their movement speed to 0, and be outside of melee range but inside the range of their melee weapon, and them just to stand there and just whack things all day is pretty awesome. It's basically like a piñata, and it's fun. It's cool when you get it to work. It's great synergy within the party, and you feel that. Like it's like because you don't see it often. It's a great thing to see and to incorporate into your game. These things can be awesome. They can be debilitating, but you need the backup, which is why you want a min-maxer in your party, well, at least 1 or 2. Generally, there's going to be a lot more. You're probably never going to see a lot of people that build towards debuffs, because it's not flashy, you know? But having them in your party that are focused on getting these things like prone. Like the tidal wave spell that druids get, it's a level 3 spell, it's a line, it's a pretty decent size. If you fail the saving throw, you're knocked prone. You go before a rogue, you hit that spell, someone gets knocked down, walks over, sneak attack, disengage, out, boom. Huge, because it's half their movement to get up. And then they have to get around to whatever there is, and there's nobody around there. You know, like, they have to resort to a range attack if they have one. Some of them don't, or some of them are not as good with range stuff as they are with melee stuff. So it's going to change to how things can work. You know, spells are limited, so you won't be doing this thing regularly. But you do it once or twice in a dungeon, and you've reduced the amount of damage you've taken. You've reduced the amount of damage your friends have taken. So now you can go into the later fights with more resources because you save spell slots, more confidence because your characters are healthier at this point, and just overall, you'll save other people a lot of resources. You'll save other casters spell slots. You'll save these things from them, so that way when the big bad shows up, they can just drop whatever heat they have and make it and finish it, you know what I mean? But you gotta be willing to deal with how costly this can be, and it's a dedicated effect. But working together with certain character classes, incredible. Like, if you have a lot of melee fighters and you're a druid, throw down Entangle and just let them go. And just watch as they walk through the weeds, just hacking everything down to bits. It's beautiful, and you feel great because you feel like a leader. You feel like you've set this up, and now the people that you are working with are now just like piranhas in the water. Like, you're just destroying what's in front of you, and that's the result of what you've done. That gives them confidence to move in. That gives them confidence to run in and go for it. You know, like, some people are skittish. They don't want their character to die, so they have to wait for these opportunities. One of the other things about working with min-maxers and things like that, a lot of the way they build things is towards one specific skill set and how to use that skill set efficiently. So when you're playing a character that doesn't really do those things, the main focus is getting a couple of these conditions to be out there, or the availability to you to use them, because you don't want to be defined by one action in combat. It becomes boring, and like you could swing a sword every day and it's always the same level of excitement. You can cast the same spell or cantrip 4 times in a row and everyone at the table is bored of it. You know, so it's a very different thing, which is just unusual to me. But you want to be able to not define yourself by one combat, by one ability, by one skill that you use repeatedly, or how effective it is. Doing this will work for that. You know, doing this in conjunction with other characters, using other things, will do that. You know, like throwing down something that causes difficult terrain and then putting something that like encases them in an area that they take damage. You know, like those things matter. If you had pillars of earth and you just caused a whole bunch of towers to appear right around the character, and then someone throws something like Hunger of Hadar in there, and it's just round after round of damage and they can't escape, that's cool. That's an incredible thing, and you did it together. You know, like that synergy becomes awesome, and you can build those things with different people depending on what skills they have. And then your thing isn't defined by one spell. Like, yeah, you used it, or you used it somewhat regularly, but now you have a couple of things you can work with other people. You have something that's fun to do in combat that you can just shout out to your other players in combat and get that like, oh shit, yeah, let's do that. Because, you know, a lot of the things in game, in combat, become very like, yeah, you're a team, but a lot of the actions become single-minded. So like a lot of people don't really discuss what they're doing, and it's harder to role play that out in combat. But if it's your turn and you're going to scream out, hey, follow up with this or whatever, or maybe you came up with a name for it, and then your party picks up on it and then they go for it, you're like, that's a cool moment. You know, that's an in-game role-playing combat moment that doesn't happen often, but changes the way things work. You know, and when you get notoriety, it's cool to hear that like some of the NPCs notice that, or they'll mention that when they say, oh, I saw you at this war and this battle, and you did this and it was incredible, and that's what you're known for. Hey, could you help us with that? Like, that's cool. You know, like you get a little bit of bolster of confidence, and that's a fun thing to do. Again, and it works greatly with these min-maxers because they're going to do everything in their power to make sure they get as much as they can out of damage. So if you liked the video so far, you're enjoying what you're seeing, please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate everything that you guys do for us. You know, we're excited to keep going. We've got a lot of stuff in the chamber that's going to come out soon. So thank you for giving A Creepy Kid a chance.